Our next speaker is Tom Funkhouser. He is a professor at Princeton University and the recipient of this year's Computer Graphics Achievement Award. Tom graduated from Berkeley back in '93, I think. So about 20 years later, he's stepping up on the stage and going to give us his wisdom over those past 20 years. Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much for honoring me with the award. I feel very humbled by it, and would like to give a talk where I tell a little bit about what I did and tell a little bit that might be helpful for other people. So I thought about lots of different topics that I could give for this talk. Since it's an award talk, it seems like I had to talk about a body of work. And so the easiest thing to do would be go, first I did this, then I did that, and then from that I did this, and so on and so forth. But I think everybody would be snoring by the third slide, so I didn't do that. Another alternative would be to try to provide some grand vision for the field. Like, what are the 5 biggest problems that we should solve in computer graphics? But other people have given talks like that, and I'm not sure really how much I would have to add, and I'm really not that smart. So I thought that was a bad plan too. So instead, I'm going to do some kind of talk that's somewhere in the middle. I'm going to suggest 5 principles that I think are important for choosing research problems, and then I explain how I've used those principles in my choices that I've made in my career. My target here is to give advice to first-year graduate students, but hopefully other people will get something from it too. Okay, so here's the 5 principles. Consider non-traditional problems, anticipate disruptive technologies, think beyond algorithms, work on real applications, and work with good collaborators. Okay, of course, these are very somewhat obvious, self-evident principles. I'm not the first person to give a talk about how to do research, and I'm sure many other people have had exactly these same principles in some other talk. However, I'm going to focus my talk on specifically computer graphics and explicitly my experiences within the SIGGRAPH community in computer graphics, and so hopefully I can say something that's useful for this audience. Okay, so let's look at these principles in detail. First is consider non-traditional problems. So this is how I think about research in computer graphics. There's a space of research problems, kind of everything inside this black blob. And within that, there's been a bunch of previous work, each represented by blue dots. And so when we choose a research project, we're basically choosing where are we going to put our next dot. You know, there's many different strategies you could use for that. The first is to pick an area that's been pretty well researched and try to improve the existing methods there. The advantages of that are you might be able to leverage lots of previous work with bibliographies or data or benchmarks that make it easier to get started. And so it's probably a pretty good idea for first-year grad students. But the downside is that the amount of impact you can possibly have is kind of limited by the distance to the closest blue dot. I've done some projects like that. Michael mentioned a project this morning about computing radiosity solutions for buildings. But the problem with that project is that it kind of came on the tail end of a lot of work on radiosity. And so the amount of impact that it actually had and the amount of follow-on work was really just not that much. Okay, so another kind of strategy you could use is to pick a research area and try to develop a new approach to a well-established existing problem. So for me, an example of that is this project called Modeling by Example. There had been lots of work on interactive 3D modeling at the time, ranging from TEDdy to commercial systems like Maya. But none of them allowed novice users to make detailed 3D models. We developed an approach where you could cut parts out of existing 3D models in a large repository and get the details from them, and then have simple commands to assemble them into new models, and kind of addressing that issue. And so this kind of introduced a new approach to interactive modeling that basically expanded the convex hull of the blue dots in that area. A third approach would be to try to find a new problem within computer graphics. An example of that is in shape analysis. Before 2000 or so, there really just weren't many papers, or maybe any papers, on shape analysis within the SIGGRAPH community. People like Misha Kajdan and Patrick Min and Robert Asada started working on shape descriptors for shape-based search engines that then led to shape analysis algorithms, and then led to collections, analysis of collections. And that's kind of led to a field that's very popular here at SIGGRAPH now. And then a fourth strategy is to try to expand the field, pick some problem that's not typically computer graphics, and try to introduce it to the community. An example of that for me is in simulation of sound. For the first 25 years of SIGGRAPH, there were not really papers on sound. There's some on visualization of sound, but not on the simulation of sound. And in 98, 99, and 2001, we had a series of 3 papers where we introduced methods in that area. We submitted them to, not really sure whether they get accepted because they were out of scope, but fortunately they were, and now there's commonly sound papers at SIGGRAPH. So my overall advice here is that you really should be mindful of what kind of research you're doing when you do it. And my advice to you is to take the risks to do kind of non-traditional things because the potential impact is much higher. Okay, so the second principle is to anticipate disruptive technologies. Okay, to think about that, we should look at a plot of how research progresses over time. Clayton Christensen and many other people have hypothesized that research progress is not linear with time. Instead, that there are disruptive technologies that get introduced and cause rapid acceleration in research progress. So some new technology gets introduced, there's this crazy amount of research that happens around it, and then after a while things peter out because people have done what they know how to do, and then another disruptive technology comes along. And I totally agree with that. So one way to think about how to pick problems is to anticipate what disruptive technologies are coming up and to start work on them now so you can lay the groundwork before they get there. Or even better, create them yourselves. So here are some examples of disruptive technologies that have affected my work. The first is fast graphics processors. In 1992, when I was a PhD student, I was working with Seth Teller and Carlos Secan on a UC Berkeley walkthrough. And at the time, we had a SGI machine with 64 megabytes of memory that could draw about 30,000 polygons per second in practice, and it cost about $200,000. Although that sounds like it's not a very powerful machine now, we were able to develop algorithms for visibility and level detail and memory management and everything else that allowed us to do visualizations of large buildings. Fortunately, later on, graphics processors became much cheaper and much faster, and so those algorithms that we had generated on the very expensive hardware became practical and very prevalent in games and other kinds of systems. And so we were just lucky that the algorithms we did became adopted. And so this gives kind of a formula for a way to pick research problems, which is use technology that's really expensive now with the hope that it will become cheap later, and so that the work you do now will become relevant later. Okay, a second example is in server-based technology. After finishing at after finishing at Berkeley, I went to Bell Labs, which at the time was owned by AT&T. And they were advocating services in the network. So that caused me to think about massively multiplayer online worlds. At the time, people were beginning to talk about multi-user virtual worlds, but most of it was using broadcast and multicast networks in laboratories or military simulations, not to the home and things like that. And the reason is because at that time, the connection to your home was a 28 kilobit per second modem. But working for the phone company caused me to think about what kinds of architectures we might use for such a system, and we arrived at multi-server architectures where there's servers managing the communication between multiple clients, which is basically the architecture people use today in multiplayer games. So again, a way to anticipate technologies is to work for companies that are developing them. And then after leaving Bell Labs, I went to Princeton. And there, my research group made this bet that there will be large repositories of 3D models available. We basically imagined that every object in the world will have some sort of 3D model that you can find on the web. It wasn't true at all at the time. For our first paper, we had a results section where we analyzed 133 polygonal models that were in 25 categories, which is like examples of 5 per category. But we still just kind of pretended that there was going to be lots of models available. And fortunately, it became true. And so now there's 3 sessions at SIGGRAPH this year on shape-based retrieval and analysis kinds of problems. Okay, of course, there's many disruptive technologies that have affected graphics that I personally just completely missed. Cheap photo sensors, 3D printing, you pick your favorite. So I missed computational photography, lots of things. But the question we should all ask ourselves is, what's the next disruptive technology? And then, what can I do to create it or get ahead of working on it now so I can lay down some groundwork for the future? Okay. So a third principle is think beyond algorithms. So there's lots of ways to contribute to research. One of them is developing algorithms. Another is design systems or collect data sets or develop benchmarks and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, within SIGGRAPH, it's my opinion that we focus too much on algorithms. If you look through the proceedings, the virtual proceedings at this SIGGRAPH, almost every single paper is proposing a new algorithm that's going to improve the previous algorithm. But there's great value in these other kinds of research I think we don't pay enough attention to them. So take collecting data sets as an example. I could start by telling you the impact that data sets have had on computer vision. Noah basically made that point then, but here's like a list of other data sets, Pascal and ImageNet and so on and so forth, that have just completely revolutionized that field. The large amount of data in ImageNet, for instance, has allowed deep learning to blow away every other algorithm for object recognition. And so I think that we could follow that example. I'll describe some of my personal experiences with collecting data sets here in graphics. So here's a list of 6 projects that I've done where the main output is a set of data. There's not an algorithm really involved. We collect data about usually like real ground truth data with measurements or what people do, and then we make that available on the web and analyze it a little bit so that other people can use it. In my opinion, these projects are as impactful or more than any other thing I've ever done. So let me take one example, line drawing. So Forrester Cole and Adam Finkelstein and Simon Ruzinkevich and others did a project where they tried to understand how artists make line drawings. At the time, there were lots of algorithms for making line drawings with computers, and every paper had its own theory about what kinds of lines should be in those drawings. There's no grounding in truth or in what were good lines or bad lines. It was just everybody had a theory. And so we set out to try to figure out what people do. So what we did was we asked artists to look at 3-dimensional models that we showed them, make line drawings of them, and then register the lines to the curves on the 3D surfaces. And what that did is that allowed us to analyze what geometric properties of the 3D surfaces correlate with where people draw lines, in this case, curvature. It allowed us to evaluate what kinds of computer line definitions and algorithms correlate well with where people would put lines, in this case, apparent ridges. And it allowed us to learn methods to synthesize new line drawings based on examples from what people did. Interestingly, the project didn't start that way. The project started by wanting to collect data that would allow us to estimate parameters that would help suggestive contours draw the right number of lines. It's really motivated by an algorithm. But at some point, as we were collecting the data, we were realizing how much more valuable the data was than the improvement of any particular algorithm. We were learning what people do, which is timeless. As it's not about making this algorithm just a little bit better, and maybe that algorithm will just go away in a few years. So I strongly believe that we as a community should do a better job of collecting data and disseminating it so that other people can come along and analyze it for years to come. Okay, the 4th principle is to work on real applications. Computer graphics sits between applications and technologies. And so thinking about the interfaces from graphics above and below is an interesting way to think about how to choose research problems. We've been an amazing community with regards to interfacing with technologies. There are just a number of papers at every SIGGRAPH that use clever ways to use cameras or processors or printers or displays or even influence their design and make new ones. We haven't been so great, in my opinion, on interfacing with applications. Yes, some people work on movies and games, but there are many, many applications out there that would benefit from our technologies and provide motivating problems that would guide us to interesting algorithms. Here I'm really just channeling Fred Brooks. So a year after I got my PhD, Fred Brooks gave a talk at SIGGRAPH here called The Computer Scientist as a Toolsmith. And basically he made the point that first of all, these applications I've listed here are just more important than any entertainment application, which I agree with. But more than that, if you work on real applications, it causes you to solve the hard problems, which causes you to invent new computer science and so you actually have a source of problems by working with real data and real applications that you wouldn't get by working on toy problems that we made up ourselves. And then also it's just helpful to the world and fun. So to make that concrete, I'll talk about 3 projects that I've done. About a decade ago, I spent a year at the European Bioinformatics Institute in Cambridge, England with Janet Thornton. And my goal there was to develop algorithms that would help predict the functions of proteins from their 3D structures. And in that project, we were able to use methods that we had originally done for graphics, Misha Kazdan's spherical harmonic shape descriptors. They just were really well suited for describing the geometric distribution of properties and binding sites because of their rotation invariance and modeling volumes. But in the other direction, we also drew stuff from their field, and the ideas of recognizing distinctive regions, statistically distinctive shapes, ended up drawing from them and ended up as a ACM TOG paper here on measuring distinctive regions of surfaces. And the combination of those 2 techniques was able to produce predictions of what kind of small molecules bind with proteins that are 3 times better than the previous state-of-the-art in bioinformatics at the time. So it's just a kind of win-win-win-win. Anyway, sorry. A second example is in paleontology. So when Jeroen Littman was a postdoc at Princeton, he and Ingrid Dobeschies worked with paleontologists to develop a surface dissimilarity metric that was useful for classifying scans of fossils. He built a continuous Procrustes distance based on an extension of Mobius voting, which was published here at SIGGRAPH, to make a distance metric. And that distance metric is just generally valuable and would have lots of applications in graphics. But it was useful enough for the paleontologists that they were able to build a classifier of scans of fossils that was on par with what the expert paleontologists who were studying the lemurs of these fossils could do. And so it was just a tool that was also just valuable for them. As a third example, a team has worked on reconstructing frescoes from broken frescoes by scanning the fragments and then trying to figure out how they go together. So Simon Ruzenkiewicz and Tim Weyrich and Benedict Brown and others were motivated by this particular application to build new kinds of scanning algorithms that could easily scan this particular kind of surface. And then Corey Toller-Franklin and Benedict Brown and others developed algorithms to try to search for matches between the frescoes based on the small-scale surface details of the complementary surfaces. And the net result was a system that could put together frescoes or suggest matches to put together frescoes, as well as the expert conservators in the archaeology lab that had been working on it for decades. And so they decided to use our system the next time that they start reconstructing the next fresco. So the common theme in all these projects is that real problems suggested research problems that we were able to generalize and publish within graphics. And then when we solve those general problems, we were able to apply them back to the original problem and actually help them in their field. And so to me, that's the most satisfying kind of work there is. I have 3 kids who are in college, and they all did internships this summer, one in psychology, one in biology, and one in paleontology. And I can't look them in the eye and tell them I work on pictures of dogs and chairs and stuff like that. I got to have something like this that I can talk about to just stay on par. Anyway, my last principle is work with good collaborators. I have been very lucky to work with just amazing postdocs and PhD students, and as I said this morning, really all the credit for everything that I've talked about goes to them. Really all the ideas and all the work was done by them, and so I'm just extremely thankful. As I said this morning, I work in the graphics group that has just smart, friendly, wonderful students. We have really fun retreats, and we all review each other's papers and help each other, and it's really hard to know where ideas came from and where they begin and end, and there's no real my students versus Adam or Simon's students or so on and so forth. So I'm just really thankful to everybody in the group. I've been lucky to work with really great collaborators outside of Princeton. In particular, my advisor in my PhD program at UC Berkeley was Carlos A. Can. He's basically the one who taught me everything I'm telling you now about how to pick research problems. While I was at Berkeley, I worked with Seth Teller. He was 2 years older than me and 2 years ahead of me in the PhD program at Berkeley. It was his 1991 paper on visibility preprocessing that was my first example on how to do research from beginning to end, and published it at SIGGRAPH. And then later the next year, we co-authored a paper where he basically did half of the work and I did half of the work. But despite the fact that he was the older student, he suggested that I be the first author. And obviously that had a big impact on my career. So anyway, I'm very thankful to Seth for really everything he did for me in the early part of my career. He sadly passed away a little over a month ago. And so it's just a huge loss for our community, and we'll miss him a lot. My advisor at Bell Laboratories, where I worked after my PhD, was Ingrid Karlbaum, and she taught me the importance of working on real applications and the importance of ethics in research, and in particular the ethics of reviewing, which I've tried to pass on to other people. And then I'd like to thank Pat Hanrahan, not because he was ever really formally my advisor, but just because he's had sage advice for very many years. And then last, I'd like to thank my family. I've been with my wife for more than 30 years, and she's been through a lot with me, and I really greatly appreciate it. I'd like to thank my parents, in particular my dad, for teaching me the importance of doing the right thing even when people aren't looking, and to my kids for being a great inspiration and fun playmates for many years. Thank you very much.